All right, everybody, can you hear me this morning? Can you see my face? Can you hear my voice? We are about to get started with a Monday morning Ask Me Anything. So let's see if all the pipes are connected. There's no real subject of this show. We're just doing kind of an Ask Me Anything episode. Let's see what is up. So happy to hang out with everybody today. This is me, your friendly neighborhood Rabbi John Carrier, and coming at you 5 days a week this week with live, let's say, studio recordings for the Jew Curious Show podcast. Not every single one of these will make it to the podcast. However, this is my favorite way to engage with people, to talk with you live, online, wherever you are coming from in the world. So if you are coming from someplace in the world, if you're not, that's, I'm kind of curious about that. But if you are coming from someplace in the world, please give me a shout out in the chat, if you will. And most importantly, let me know what questions you have, because we're about to do a live Ask Me Anything. So this could really go in a lot of different directions. I'm willing to take that risk. Last week we had an AMA on Sunday, and it was bananas. I had no idea. I had no reason to expect it was going to be as great as it was, and yet we did it. And I was glad we did it, because we get some great questions that I couldn't have anticipated, but hopefully I gave some good answers. And most importantly, what I love is when people engage not only with me, but with each other in the chat. So feel free to introduce yourself. If your name is different from your YouTube handle, let us know where you are coming in from. We get people from all over the world, literally chiming into these things, from Denmark, from Cyprus, Germany, Thailand, as far away as Fullerton, California. Hi, Ruthie. How you doing? Good to see you on Shabbat. We got people from Arcadia. We've got people from SoCal, NorCal, Florida, sunny Florida, the Sunshine State, I think is what Florida is called. I don't know if it's the Oranges State. Sometimes I think that's California. California is the Golden State. Florida is the Sunshine State, as far as I know. So just to do a little intro for our people on the Jew Curious Show podcast. Again, this is a live studio recording, so sometimes I'll sound a little radio-y, but most of it is just going to be us chatting. So really happy to engage with everybody. I got a couple of people. Victoria is coming in. Hey, Victoria. Is this the Victoria that I saw at the AJU campus last week? If so, let me know, and I am so proud that we could see each other last week on the occasion that we did. If not, hi, Victoria. There's more than one Victoria out there, so happy to see Alexandria coming in from New York today. So I'm going to pause for just a second, do the intro to the podcast in case this episode gets cut up and edited and broadcast through the iTunes. Let's do this. Hero, if you are listening to the Jew Curious Show, and you are, I can only assume that you are curious about Judaism, so let me get right to the point. What questions do you have? In this episode, we are going to have a live Ask Me Anything session. We are going to have a live Ask Me Anything session with people tuning in for the live studio recording on YouTube. Right after this bass. All right, Victoria from South Jersey. So, sorry, different Victoria. Sorry to mix you up. Every single Victoria is unique and created in God's image, and I'm so glad you are here, Victoria from South Jersey. We've got Milo from Denmark, Teresa from Cyprus. See, I'm not lying, y'all. We got people worldwide. We've got William from Waukesha Springs, Florida, in the house. Miss Lexa Noel from Pennsylvania. It's Alexa from Pennsylvania. Welcome to Alexa from Pennsylvania. I can't say that too loud. My Echo Dot chimes in and thinks I'm talking to her. I'm sure you get that a lot. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to make fun of your name, but it's just the times that we're living in. So really happy to have everybody here today. So let me do a little more podcasty stuff, and then we will jump right into questions that people have. There's a little bit of a lag here. So if you have some questions in mind, go ahead and type those into chat, and I will take them in whatever order I see them. And I'm going to promise you, I will not be perfect today. So it's Monday morning. My kids were on spring break all last week. Plus we had Purim. and continued Purim festivities yesterday with the Hebrew school at the synagogue that I'm a part of. So it's Monday. It's Monday for me, just like it's Monday for you. We will do this as well as we can, but I promise you there will be mistakes. If I don't answer your question or I don't see your question, I'll ask periodically for people to retype them in case I miss anything, but I want to make sure whatever questions you have get answered. And I want to ask you to be brave about this because I want to get the questions answered for your sake, but also if you have questions about Judaism, I guarantee you that there are people in the Jew Curious show audience who have the same questions. So if you ask your question and I give a semi-competent answer, this will not only be serving you, but also serving the broader Jew Curious community as well. So if you're afraid to ask your question, just remember you're not just doing it for you. You could really be helping somebody else. So 1 second. Let me just clear the sinuses. Take a little drink of rocket fuel here. That's good fuel. And here's what I usually do after those inspiring opening beats. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Joey Weissenberg and the Hadar Ensemble. Thank you to the live studio audience who are tuning in here on YouTube. And most of all, thank you, Hero, for listening to the Jew Curious Show. This is a podcast for Jew Curious people of all sorts. Some people listening are considering or well on their way to converting to Judaism. Some people are Jewish, have been Jewish their whole lives, but are maybe walking in the building for the first time in a while, if not the first time ever. Some people are curious about the Jewish roots of their own faith. Some people are just plain curious, spiritual seekers trying on different paths to see which is right for them. In any case, Hero, you are welcome here. What we're doing today is a Monday morning AMA. This is an Ask Me Anything segment. Whatever questions you've had for a rabbi in the past that maybe got answered but not to your satisfaction, or you've been nervous to ask a rabbi. And I want you to take advantage of this. I'm not sitting in the same room with you. I can't see you blush. You can't see me blush. Ask your questions live here in the live studio chat. If you're listening to this recording later, know that you too can participate in a future studio recording. Know that you too can participate in a future live studio recording of the Jew Curious School. All you have to do is go to my YouTube page. That's youtube.com/Rabbi John Carrier. All three of those words kind of smushed together. That's John with an H, Carrier with 3 R's, just like the large boat that carries airplanes, and Rabbi as in Rabbi. So go there, subscribe, find out when our live studio sessions are scheduled, what kind of topics we're going to be talking about. Today is a bit of a free-for-all, and I feel emboldened by this because last time we did this, we had a session that exceeded all of my expectations. I mean, I know I have a great, smart audience. I know we have a great, smart audience who asks great questions, but man, I didn't expect how good it was going to be. So that's kind of a high bar for you folks playing at home right now. You got to ask some good questions today, and just know that if you have a question, other people have that question. The more questions you ask, the more people you help. And that's why I am so delighted to do these kind of live sessions. So enough introductions. Well, maybe a little bit more introduction. If you're here for the first time, then if you're here for the first time, or maybe the second or third time, please consider subscribing to this podcast on the podcast delivery system of your choosing. There should be a little button or a little picture of a button that you could tap. And if you subscribe, then you will auto-magically download all future episodes, as well as get access to the 30 plus episodes that we've already done in the past. And if you consider doing this, Hero, I would be much obliged. Now, let's get into it. Let's see who is joining us in our live studio session. We have got Alexandria from New York. We've got Victoria from South Jersey is in the house. William from Florida. Alexa from Pennsylvania. Milo from Denmark. There goes my my Echo Dot just lit up. I'm sorry once again for making that reference. Alexa, tell me a knock knock joke.
Knock, knock. Who's there? Tyler. Tyler who? Tyler Marble. I can't decide which would look better in the foyer.
Okay, I can't resist that because my kids were doing that all through dinner last night. So we have Carmen says good day. I don't know if you're coming from Australia, but good day to you, Carmen. We do, just because we do get people from Australia, New Zealand, and down south there. I'm from the south, but not that far south. William is asking about Olamhaba. What is it? We've already got questions in here. Olamhaba, what is it? The world to come. What does the Torah have to say about Olamhaba? Interesting question that we will get right to. Alexandria is asking. She says, I have a weird question. I'll be the judge of that, Alexandria. I read somewhere that you aren't supposed to blow out or snuff Shabbos candles. There wasn't anything cited of where that comes from. Is it different across conservative and reform? Great question. Just taught a class on this last week here in SoCal, but a very important one. Let's see. Does it matter if you use a smaller candle so you don't have to worry about staying up late or not leaving the room? Carmen, let's see, says NB. I'm not sure. Is that New Brunswick? Something like that? Let's say, Nevada. So Carmen is coming in from Nevada. Thank you for clearing like that. Teresa is already answering a question. Always leave Shabbos candles to burn out naturally. So we'll come back to that. I'll give you the full details. Thank you for coming in with these great questions. Alexa's saying, when emailing a rabbi for the first time about starting the conversion process, what should you include in the email? And should you keep it short and sweet? I can't tell you how many questions I get about people about to approach a rabbi for the first time and how to do that, which makes me feel a little bit like the Wizard of Oz. Like it's this big, scary thing, and you knock on the door, and this big guy with a mustache says, "Who rang that bell?" Nobody talks to the wizard. No way, no how. So we're really not all that different from everybody else. And Victoria asked this great question: how does God really want us to pray? Sometimes I'm just not feeling it, but I think that's when I need it the most. So we've got some fantastic questions to start off with. So let me go scroll up the chat, take these in order. Olamhaba, what is it? So Olamhaba means the world to come, and this is a term that's usually referred to both in discussions of the afterlife, but also in Jewish eschatology, or sort of the messianic tradition. And I don't mean messianic like Messianic Judaism. Don't get me started on that. But the idea of the messianic era and the world to come, the Jewish apocalypse, if you will. If that sounds scary, if it sounds like there are volcanoes or zombies involved, apocalypse just means the end of an era. That's a Greek word, I think. So Olamhaba comes in to play in Jewish discussions in a couple of different ways. So in one way, it's talking about our vision of a messianic age, meaning when Mashiach comes, and we often talk about, okay, we're looking for this Messiah figure that gets kicked around in a couple of different religions. I'll say that. First, let me just back up and say the Jewish idea of Mashiach or Messiah is very different from the Christian idea of Mashiach, and sometimes these things get confused with one another. It just means an anointed leader. And when there's a notion that there's this anointed leader, and Saul was one, and David was one, and Solomon was one. These were all anointed leaders who had no special magical background, but they were anointed to lead the people in a typical kind of coronation ceremony. And so there's a notion that, especially in our history, about 2000, I'm going to pause for a second. We've got a little bit of a fire truck going out there. One of the fun things about doing this live. El Na Rafan Allah. You should always pray whenever you hear an ambulance or a fire siren that everybody's okay. Got that from Rabbi Joseph Telushkin. Okay, there it goes. This is the fire engine that will not stop. I think it's circling the block. There's this idea that we are waiting for an anointed leader to come at a time when we really need it, to redeem an unredeemed world, a world where people struggle, a world where people suffer, a world where people are at war with each other, and talks a little bit about this in the writings of the prophet Isaiah, that someday we will have a world where we will not again teach war or learn how to go to war with each other. Spears will be beaten into pruning hooks. Mankind will not again practice war. The lion shall lie down with the lamb and all that stuff. And there will be this great era of peace. And that the world that takes place after that is called Olamhaba. There are some Jewish traditions that in that era there will be a bodily revival of the dead, that the world will only be peaceful after that point. There are some teachings that all holidays, this is my favorite, especially this time of year, that all holidays will be abolished because we no longer need to pray for forgiveness or always give thanks. All holidays will go out the window. Every day will be like Shabbat, because it's said that Shabbat is like a taste of the world to come. So we can only imagine that the world to come is just like wall-to-wall Shabbos, except for one holiday. And the rabbi said that was Purim. And so I don't know why they kept that one, but I have some ideas. It's a pretty fun holiday that we just experienced. But this Olam Haba is this world to come. It's this post-apocalyptic paradise that most everybody will get to participate in. It's not like heaven in a heaven-hell dichotomy. It's like everybody's there, pretty much. There's a couple people maybe not be there. But your sort of share in that is proportional to your life on this earth. And that everything is going to be hunky-dory. Everybody gets to participate, right? If in Jewish eschatology, like people who were really wicked in this world maybe don't get as big a share, but they're still there after a sort of purgatory-like process that sometimes we call Sheol or sometimes Gehinnom. But it's this new era, right? There is another teaching about Olamhaba. Sometimes we talk about Olamhaba as the personal afterlife. Or sometimes you can see these things fusing, that when a person passes away, that there is something of a purgative process that goes on, never really that long, never permanent, not like this eternal lake of sulfurous fire that you hear about in other traditions. But then once that purgative process has finished, the soul goes into Olam Haba. Or one can imagine maybe that soul goes to sleep or suspended animation until the post-Messianic period, in which time everybody wakes up in Olam Haba and it's grand. So sometimes Olam Haba is talked about as the next era. Sometimes it's talked about as the personal afterlife. And these are Jewish teachings, but I want to caution that you can be Jewish without thinking too much about this, or without even believing in it necessarily. There are those Jews who say, our focus should be in this world. And I'm going to confess, this is a little bit more where I go personally, right? I'm not going to tell you what to believe or how to believe, but there's a teaching in the Talmud that says it's better that one should never have been born than to ask 4 questions, these particular 4 things. What was before, what is after, what is above, and what is below. And I believe this comes from Masechet Hagiga in the Talmud. And the reason for this is they think people get so bent out of shape, people get so focused on the afterlife, especially when this life is pretty hard. And I'm not going to argue with you, this life can be pretty hard. But people just project their consciousness into the afterlife and focus on that. But it takes you out of the world. It takes you out of the game. It takes you out of focusing on what is most important in this world. And so there are mystical teachings on what the afterlife will be like. And there is also a school of thought among the sages of our tradition that's an interesting speculation, but we have no reliable reports. And buddy, don't you have enough to do in this world? Right? We've got to raise families or take care of ourselves or take care of each other or take care of our communities. And mitzvot are for living people, right? The dead, it says in Hallel, in these psalms of praise that we say on holidays, that the dead cannot praise God. There, there are things that we have to focus on in this world. I'm not trying to shut down the question or anything, but this is just my personal take on Olamhaba. I've read different traditions about it. It's nice to think about sometimes, especially when it's like, man, this world's tough. Can't wait for the next one. Man, it doesn't seem like a just world now. Can't wait for Mashiach to just fix everything for us. But I really believe personally it's our job to fix the world that we have, and it's our job to do the mitzvahs that we can do in this world, regardless of how that translates into, property values in Olam Haba. And, good thing we don't believe in lightning bolts, because I'd probably get hit by one right now. But I hope that answers your question. Olam Haba is both an afterlife, but also, let's say, an afterworld post-Mashiach in sort of Jewish mysticism or mystical thought or metaphysical thought. So I'm going to move on from that. Further, if you have follow-up questions, feel free to put those in the chat. I'm going to go to Alexandria. I'm going to go to Alexander, who asks, I have a weird question. I read somewhere that you aren't supposed to blow out or snuff Shabbos candles or Shabbat candles. And the reason for this is that among the 39 avot melacha, these are the 39 primary categories of forbidden labor on Shabbat. Two of them are you're not supposed to light a fire on Shabbat, and you're also not supposed to extinguish a fire on Shabbat, right? Because these are associated with time, because these are associated with creation or destruction or activities that contribute to the building of the Mishkan. That's where we get these things. But any sort of creative work, anything where you're changing states of matter, for example, or not just leaving the world as it is, assuming that everything's going to be fine for 25 hours. So we don't light fire and we don't extinguish fire. And so blowing out Shabbos candles would be extinguishing fire. And so let's go best practices. Let me pull one up on video so you can see. Just got a box of new Shabbos candles in this week's grocery run. Buy them 72 at a time because we don't mess around. And they're only about this big. And you can't see this on podcast. This is terrible radio right now. But they're not that big. They burn for 2, 3, 4 hours, something like that. Long enough that you light them when the sun goes down, or right before the sun goes down, ideally. And they last through dinner until about bedtime. And you can put them in a safe place. We have ours on metal candlesticks. And those metal candlesticks are on a metal tray, not next to any drapes or anything that might catch fire. And so the ideal is that you don't burn them. You let them burn. You don't snuff them out. Some people go so far as to say you don't even blow out a match, right? But you can maybe put the match down on something metal that it won't damage. You might consider putting your Shabbos candles on a stovetop. If you're really worried about them. I've heard of people lighting their Shabbat candles like in their kitchen sink, right? So if they have to go to bed before the candles burn out, they're surrounded by a metal basin and a source of water. So God forbid anything happens, then it's not gonna be too damaging to your home or to life and limb, God forbid. Now, if something catches on fire and you have to put it out to save a life, you absolutely do that. There's a principle, pikuach nefesh tochei Shabbat. Saving a life always supersedes the obligations or restrictions of Shabbat. However, because the ideal is to not put the candles out, get small candles, first of all. Get candles that are going to go out before you go to bed. And put them in a place that is safe to let them burn so that you don't have the urge to put the candles out in order to save property or human life. And so that's typically how it's done. I mean, there are people who've been doing this for, literally a couple thousand years with some success. Do accidents happen? Sure they do. But can you also prevent accidents? Of course you can. And God forbid an accident happens, you can totally put that fire out. But the ideal is to light them before Shabbat starts, when you can still light fires, and just let them burn and let them, kind of illuminate your Friday evening. And I'm kind of a Maimonidean in a sense. I'm a bit of a rationalist. Probably the primary mitzvah associated with lighting candles is Oneg Shabbat. Of the four different things we're supposed to do to Shabbat, we're supposed to remember it, we're supposed to protect it, we're supposed to honor it, and we are supposed to delight in it. And lighting the candles is associated with this principle of delight, according to the Rambam, according to Maimonides. Two different ways of naming the same guy. Because it's delightful to have candlelight dinner on Shabbat. I know there are deeper mystical teachings about this, but I like to go with Maimonides that candles are pretty, and you should have pretty things on Shabbat. So I hope that answers your question. Doesn't really differ between Orthodox, conservative, reform. The mitzvah and the halacha is the same for all. Are there people who will extinguish their candles because they're punctilious about safety? There are. And my approach is get small candles. You can get tea lights; those work well. You can get Shabbat candles at the grocery store that burn for just the amount of time that you're around to supervise them. And so, if you're really worried and you blow them out, I'm not going to judge you for that. I would just say, if you want to do it the traditional way, find small candles that you can let burn, and situate them in a safe way. That you don't have to worry about it. And people do this all the time with no ill effect. So let's see. We've talked about Olamhaba. And also, let me just jump back to that, talking about Olamhaba, the world to come. What does the Torah have to say about it? If you want to go Torah mamash, Torah, as in the first 5 books of Moses, doesn't really talk about it at all. There are other discussions of afterlife in the Torah. In the Torah itself, in the first 5 books, afterlife is largely discussing this concept of Sheol. And Sheol, it was just that place that you go after you die. Like when it talks about Jacob's sons, saying, sort of in despair, Joseph is lost. They're worrying about losing Benjamin. And they say, if Benjamin is lost, then Jacob's head will, go down into Sheol to be gathered unto his ancestors, right? Which is very much like a Greek notion of the underworld where everybody goes. When we talk about Sheol, it's sort of considered a place below the ground, and everybody goes there regardless of how they live their life. There's not a lot of talk about a world to come. That gets more into the prophetic visions of Isaiah and others. And so talking about, there will be this new era of peace. And so they're not talking about a personal afterlife per se. They're talking about a new era for living people. And then later on it gets into Tihat HaMetim, or the revival of the dead. So the Torah doesn't talk about it. The prophets talk about it a little bit. And more of it is expanded in like mystical, Kabbalistic literature and things like that. So let's see. What is a less okay, just trying to keep up with the chat here. That's why editing software is awesome. Carmen says, I've had certain practices, Shabbat, washing of hands. I may be a Marano. Please know I take no insult with that statement. My question, how would I really know if I am Sephardic lineage? So I can't tell you that necessarily. In the sense that you can if you have access to a family tree or family stories. I've heard I'll say especially here in Southern California, where we have a lot of people who came to Southern California from Mexico or Central America or South America after making the trip from Spain to Central or South or Southern North America. And so we have a lot of, let's say, native Spanish-speaking people in Los Angeles who have this inkling of a Marrano heritage, or sometimes called crypto Jews, things like that. People who left Spain and had Jewish ancestors. And today I hear stories all the time, sitting on the Beit Din, of people sort of officially rejoining the Jewish family, let's say, who have memories of their abuela, their grandmother, down in the basement every Friday night, putting a cloth on her head and lighting candles. And they would ask their grandmother, why are you doing that? And she says, I have no idea, but this is what my abuela used to do. And so this is a family custom. And it's sort of intellectually removed from, its Jewish roots. Like people don't understand why they're doing it, but you can tell that there's this sort of, let's say, spiritual DNA involved that's handed down from one generation to another. And so if you can, ask family members, like, what are some Jewish looking things that we used to do? If you have access to a family tree, great. I can't tell you. I've had more than one or two people come into my office as a rabbi saying, "I just took a 23andMe or a similar genetic test through mail order, and Rabbi, I'm 7.6% Jewish. Now what do I do? Like, what are my obligations? Like, do I have to pay dues to the club, or do we get jackets? What is it?" And so there are different ways you can find out about your heritage. You can ask people. You can look in family records. You can take some of these scientific tests. I'm going to go with the teaching of one of my great teachers, Rabbi Brad Artson, who says, if your soul thirsts for Judaism, for Jewishness, for Jewish wisdom, listen to that longing, right? And pursue it as far as you are comfortable pursuing it. And maybe that'll be an indication for you. And whether you were genetically, biologically from Jewish stock or not, this is a family that can welcome you. And I hope that's helpful for you. So let's see. Alexandria says, so it seems that people, okay, this chat is a wonky thing. I'm still learning this technology. Somebody says, it seems that people in particular, like in a Reform congregation, may blow them out anyway, since they also light after sunset in services. That probably goes congregation by congregation. I'm not a Reform rabbi, so I can't speak for the Reform movement. We got Kathy's in the house saying hi to Teresa. Vanessa says hi, Kay. This is what I love. I don't know if you've had any teachers who encourage chatter in the back of the classroom, but I love it when Jew-curious people connect with each other on this chat. That's one of my favorite things about this. So, Alexander says, I guess it's the intent over the strict rules, like driving. Better to drive to be with the community to observe Shabbat than not be able to make it. Listen, all Jewish practice is a negotiation. And I'm going to say that regardless of what Jewish path you are on. Some people may, have this sort of bumper sticker philosophy. God said it, I do it, end of discussion. I would argue that anybody who lives in the modern world, outside maybe some people who live in very particular insular communities where they only interact with each other, and even then, that is an act of will. That is an act of, weighing the consequences, the pros and the cons, and making a choice about how you are going to live your life, which mitzvot you are going to take on. Some people get really, let's say, urgent to keep all 613 commandments that are in the Torah. And I teach them what my rabbi taught me when I had such a sense of urgency. That is literally impossible, because of these 613 mitzvot, these do's and don'ts in the Torah. Some of them only apply when a temple is standing and we don't have one. Some of them only apply when you are a farmer in Israel. Some of them only apply when you are a woman, and I am not. And so that's a bunch off the table for me right there. And as my rabbi said, like, if you're good for like 30 or 40 mitzvot, you might be the most religious person that you know. And so I wouldn't sweat too much, like, okay, does this congregation do this? Is this a general philosophy? I will say that the Reform minchag is more pro-choice in the sense that all of these traditions are available to us, and we learn them and we adopt them as our individual situation and reason dictates. Whereas on the farther end of the spectrum toward Orthodox, it's more like this is a portfolio of commitments that we have, some of which we agree to, or some of which that we understand and agree with, some of which we may not 100% understand or agree with, but we take all of them on as a portfolio of practice within our community that our community has some consent for. But my favorite illustration is about kashrut. A good friend of mine from a previous congregation said, wherever you are in the spectrum of keeping kosher, or let's say you find the person who is the strictest keeper of kosher that you know, There will be at least one rule of kashrut that you have heard about or read about where you ask them if they do that, and they will say, no, that's for crazy people. Right? There's an old saying, wherever you are on the religious spectrum, anyone to the left of you is a heretic, and anyone to the right of you is a fundamentalist. I'm not going to give too many generalizations about different movements and things like that. So my best advice is learn the mitzvot and take those on which are most comfortable for you, and then stretch. Take on some that are a little bit less uncomfortable for you, because you do not know how they may transform your life for the better. And some mitzvot are going to be yes, some mitzvot are going to be no, but I would say modify your no with maybe like a not yet, and take those on down the road as you can. If you try to do everything at once, that's just exhausting. So let's see what else we have going on in the chat. Val says, referring to finding a Sephardic line, I stumbled upon mine. Some of that is absolutely true. So we have a hero who I've seen here before with the YouTube handle A Bowl of Salad. And they say, I'm back. Nice to see you, A Bowl of Salad. I wish I knew your real name because your handle makes me giggle. Victoria from South Jersey says, God put keeping Shabbat in with other really serious commandments. It's in the top 10, y'all. Not going to argue with you, Victoria. Does that suggest God considers not keeping it on the same level as murdering or stealing? So I don't know the mind of God. I try to understand it a little bit better every day. I can't say that not keeping Shabbat is like committing murder, because I think that would put a lot of guilt on some people who are still learning how to keep Shabbat. Murdering for me is pretty obvious, right? Stealing for me is pretty obvious. Shabbat has a lot going on for it that can take a lifetime to master if you are not born into a Shabbat observant community. So that's why I wouldn't necessarily equate not keeping Shabbat with murder. It is in the top 10. Where I will do a comparison, although there are rabbis who say you can't know. This says in the Pirkei Avot, don't distinguish between major mitzvot and minor ones. You can't know what the reward or penalty is, right? You can't know exactly how God ranks these things. We have a bit of an indication with the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 Commandments, and everything else. What I will say to people who get really bent out of shape about, let's say, Chaton, like not mixing wool and linen fibers. I would say, are you keeping all the 10 Commandments, right? If you're going to sweat Chaton, are you avoiding coveting, for example, which is one of the harder ones to understand for me. I'll say when people get bent out of shape, and I know this is a hobby horse for me, I've talked about it before, when people get bent out of shape about homosexuality. When people use the Bible, say, to discriminate against people who identify as LGBTQIA or folks, when I hear them say, one man, one woman, that's marriage, it's in the Bible, I'll say, how's your Shabbos practice? Like, are you keeping Shabbat that you're yelling at me about what's in the Bible? Have you had a pork sandwich today that you're yelling at other people about what's in the Bible? So that's when I get into ranking 10 Commandments and things like that. We have a rabbi in the house. Rabbi Jeremy Marquise is saying hi to the Jewish community. What is the hardest part of being a rabbi? I'm going to punt that one. I think the hardest question is answering questions like that. What's the hardest part about being a rabbi? Is staying curious, staying humble, keeping in mind that I still have so much to learn. Maybe that's a bit of a humble brag. That's actually not hard. I've got things that humble me all the time. And I'm always reminded of gaps in my education. And so, but I think the hardest thing about being a rabbi is just staying conscious of that. And here's what I'll cop to. I didn't get into this business because I don't love Judaism, right? I love Judaism. Right? I love the mitzvot. I love praying. I love the rules. I love showing up to the parties, and I love getting things right. and I love finding out when I'm wrong and correcting those things. And I know a lot of rabbis go to rabbinical school because they really love Judaism. And what I discovered is that it is at least as important, if not way more so, to love Jews, right? Whether they are copying, whether they are agreeing with me about Judaism or not. And so today I tell rabbinical students, when you love Jewish people, and I'll extend that, when you love humans created in the image of God, as we all are, as much as you love the rules and the pomp and the circumstance, when you love Jews and Jew-curious people and everybody on this earth as much as you love Judaism, that day you start to become a rabbi. And so I'm going to throw that out there. All right, let's see what's going on here in the chat. Let's say Carmen says hi back. Michael is in the house. Good morning, Rabbi. What's your view on a non-Jew or soon-to-be convert praying daily from a Sidor? I think that is a fantastic idea in the sense that whatever practice you can get in before you really take on responsibility for that practice, I think it's all to the good. People ask me sometimes, like, is it okay to wear a talit? Is it okay to wear a kippah? Is it okay to do put on tefillin, do this and that and the other? Is it okay to keep kosher? This is all l'shem hinuch. This is all for the sake of education, for the sake of practice. And according to some strains of Jewish theology, the day you become Jewish, you take on responsibility for all of these mitzvot. And it is hard to take on all that at once. And when I say take on responsibility, meaning if you break one of these rules, then that's between you and God on Yom Kippur, right? And so that you can get good at things before you are responsible for things is all to the good. The prayer book, most of it, is an anthology of psalms, right? It's mostly reading poems written by our, let's say, rock star king, David. He was a musician and a poet in addition to being a warrior. So that's why I call him the rock star king sometimes. And so most of these are poems that have been available to humanity for, most of 3,000 years. And some of these are, and the other are selection from the Bible and things like that. You don't necessarily have to say these prayers before you're Jewish. And if you're Jewish and you're not saying these prayers, I'm not going to ding you for that. Everybody starts someplace, regardless of where you're coming from. But you should absolutely pray with the Sidor if you have the wherewithal, if you have the time, if you have the gumption to climb up that hill of learning the Hebrew. Absolutely pray. There are certain things you probably shouldn't do. Don't pretend you're Jewish to count in a minyan. That's pretty much it for me. Like, there are certain things that in Jewish communities only Jewish people do, like count in a prayer quorum, like say blessings over the Torah, that lead services, things like that really should be a Jewish person. But as far as individual practice goes, take on what you take on. There are those who would, shoo away non-Jews from doing these things. I think if you have the intent to practice for your impending Jewish life, absolutely practice what you're going to practice. And if it's ever unclear whether you should be doing something or not, ask me, ask your local rabbi, and we can help you out with that. See, Bud Rod is in the house. Our rabbi didn't understand my concerns with shatnez. Just wanted to know if you're coming, if they have just want. Let's see. Sorry, chat jumps around a little bit. So let me get caught up. Love this editing software that we're going to apply. But you guys get the blooper reel. You guys get the live studio audience jokes that other people will not get. So let's see. Again, just going to back up in the chat for a little bit. Bud Rod says, so funny, our rabbi didn't understand my concerns with shatnez. So shatnez, everybody, like it just says in the Torah, like, don't do shatnez. It was like, okay, what's shatnez? And so later on we, get the explanation. Don't mix certain kinds of fibers in one garment, which gets into a whole other category of not mixing things that don't necessarily belong together, in the sense that it's customary, or it's, law for Jewish farmers not to plant two types of crop in the same row, right? Because one might take away from the other. Don't put a yoke Y-O-K-E, on, or how do I put this? Don't yoke together a donkey and an ox to pull a plow. Why? Because they'll go in circles. Right? One animal is just way stronger than the other animal, right? And it puts an unfair burden on each of them. And so there are some things that it's better to kind of keep uniform and not to mix. And so they threw in here, wool and linen. Appreciate the beauty of wool, appreciate the beauty of linen, and don't mix them together. But I will acknowledge that in the reality of Jewish practice, this is something that fewer people worry about. Right, I'll go so far as to say, like, okay, if you're worried about Shatnez, make sure you're cool on all the 10 Commandments first. Right, worry about Shabbat before you worry too much about Shatnez. Worry about feeding the poor. Worried about working toward a just society, and when you're satisfied with that, then you can go to the Shatnez inspector to put on a little jeweler's loop to make sure your blazers are okay. Let's see. Do some Army Brat 173. Welcome, Army Brat. I don't know if I've seen you here before, but you are welcome nonetheless. Do synagogues put on their lights before Shabbat and keep them on to the end of Shabbat? Many do. Some people use timers. If you've got the wherewithal and the electrician chops to put your lights on a timer, that happens too. Some synagogues, depending on their practice, don't worry about it too much and use a light switch. And so this varies. I will say Orthodox synagogues, by and large, will have some way that nobody has to touch the lights who doesn't want to touch the lights. Sometimes they have non-Jewish employees who work there throughout the week, and their job is to make sure the lights are on when they should be on and off when they should be off. And so this is accomplished without a Jewish person telling them what to do, because according to Jewish law, if you've ever heard the phrase Shabbos Goy, or a Gentile or a non-Jewish person who does things for you on Shabbat, the law is actually pretty clear that a Jewish person is not allowed to tell a non-Jewish person to do something for them that they are not allowed to do themselves. Just want to clarify that, because I got that question this week in one of my classes. However, you can have people there who are, turning on the light for their own sake, and you can benefit from that light. Some people use timers, and again, some people don't sweat it, because I personally go by the teaching of Rabbi Elliot Dorff, that the, let's say, more traditional concern of touching electricity because electricity is like fire, Rabbi Dorff disagrees. He says it's not like fire because it doesn't produce a smoke or a cinder or destroy anything in the process, and that closing an electrical circuit is like tying or untying a temporary knot, which is allowed to do. You can tie your shoes on Shabbos, just don't tie like sailor knots or anything permanent like that. So different practice. Again, some people keep the lights on, some people use a timer, some people don't sweat it. So let's see what other questions we have in here. I just lost it a little bit. Man, this chat runs fast because we got so many good questions going on here. Can you carry a purse and your own Sidor? Do you have, this is another question about Shabbat. Can you carry a purse or your own Sidor? Do you have to phone ahead and let them know you're coming if they have guards? So let's say, just these are two different questions. One, I think, is a Shabbat question, meaning there's one of the avot malacha. The main rules of Shabbat is you're not supposed to carry things, meaning you don't transfer an item from a private place to a public place or vice versa, or a certain distance within a public place, which is why a lot of people don't carry things even in their pockets on Shabbat, unless you live in an Eruv, unless you live in an area of, let's say, mixed private and public domain, delineated by some sort of barrier that permits carrying on Shabbat. So some people work, and again, some people sweat this, some people don't. Some people will carry their purse regardless. Some people will only carry their purse within an Eruv. A Sidor is also an object. In these a lot of communities where people are concerned about carrying, they have Sidorim, they have prayer books at the shul. Or if you have your own prayer book, there was a place that I love to go to in Jerusalem where people would just they were at the synagogue every day anyway. They would just put their own prayer book on the shelf at the synagogue. So it was already there when they showed up, and their talit and tefillin and things like that. Let's see. So William asks, can an anusim, and this is somebody in the category of somebody who has sort of separated multiple generations from Jewish practice, can an anusim that has family history of Jewish practices, will they have to undergo a conversion process? And when will they be counted in a minyan? And typically, how long is that conversion process? So let's say you've got this inkling that you've got Jewish background in your family, but you can't prove that you are either to your own satisfaction or anybody else's, that you were matrilineally Jewish, meaning your mother was Jewish, her mother was Jewish, and so on. At that point, you can go through a conversion process, and this varies by the standards of the community you seek to join: Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, etc. Each kind of movement has their own, let's say, standards of what it takes. That also talks about, that will also go to how long the conversion process is. I'm not familiar with Orthodox practice. I know in most conservative, I'm not really informed in Reform practice as well. I know that many conservative communities like to see you study for a year, or let's say maybe the study portion is shorter. I teach an 18-week class here in SoCal, for example, but most people in that class have been on the path learning for a year or more. And I like to see that. I like to see people having gotten through a whole cycle of holidays, for example. So it can take a year or more, or many years, depending on the community that you're seeking to join. And yes, if you don't have, let's say, a pretty solid understanding that your mother was Jewish, at least in the conservative and Orthodox world, then you would need to go through the conversion process. In the Reform movement, it's such that you need to have at least one Jewish parent and have been, raised thinking of yourself as a Jew. And at this point, a lot of times when people come to the Beit Din like this, we don't even necessarily call it a conversion, because people come with a sense of Jewish identity and, no loyalty to anything else. We call it more of like a recertification, right? It's like, sometimes you have to go to the city hall to get a copy of your birth certificate, right? Just for whatever reasons, you lost your birth certificate, it got lost in a move, or your parents are across the country and can't get it. You've got to go get a copy of your birth certificate. Now, just by showing up at the office, it's clear to everybody that you were born, right? And this isn't my joke. I get this from Rabbi Warren Levy, who's the Ab Beit Din, the Beit Din that I sit on. It's clear and obvious that you were born. You're an existing human being. However, you have to go through a process to get your birth certificate, and sometimes that involves proof. Sometimes it involves a little paperwork. Sometimes it involves a little bit of research. And so, but nevertheless, you are just sort of making it official at that point. And so, yes, before you should put yourself out as counting in a minyan, you should be officially Jewish according to the standards of the community that you want to join. Let's see. I love this comment. A bowl of salad says, I love starting a sentence that way. A bowl of salad says, I consider myself secular, but I still keep Shabbos because I need a mental break from technology and work for a while. Right? And says further, my Korean side is a major workaholic. This is a whole movement I've seen going on lately in the last, let's say, 5-10 years, that so many people who are secular are taking on, whether they're Jewish secular or not Jewish secular, are taking on this practice of Shabbat because they see how beneficial it is, right? How much do our electronics dominate our lives? How much does this, especially in America, and I can't speak for other places, but especially in America in the 21st century, how much does this assumption of dependable connectivity, accessibility of each person dominate our lives and cause stress and cause anxiety, even if it's not really necessary, right? And so, like, I remember back when the only people who had pagers were, doctors and drug dealers, right? And nowadays, everybody has some sort of device that there is a social norm that if that device pings or peeps or buzzes or whatever, you have to jump into it. It'll interrupt any conversation that you're having in that moment, much less any thoughts that you're thinking or studying that you're doing. And how beneficial is it for people to say, you know what? I'm going to, based on a higher principle, I'm going to take this little device and put it in a drawer for 25 hours. And I like to say to my students, I dare you, right? I double dog dare you. As long as you're not like a firefighter on call or a surgeon on call or something like that, where you could literally save somebody else's life in that moment, I dare you to put it away for 25 hours. My favorite time is from, sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, and just see how your life improves. See how, I hate to say it, the world gets on without you. And see just how not mad people are if you wait until Saturday night to check back in with them. So that's my advice, and that's a bowl of salads advice as well. So Val asked the question, if one practices while waiting to sit in front of the Beit Din, would that person be a Noahide? And so I get so many questions about what it means to be a Noahide. What are the Noahide laws? There are 7, according to Jewish tradition, there are 7 laws that everyone should follow, because these laws came in the time of Noah, which kind of rebooted the human race, if you will. And so these are laws that, everybody can follow for a good life. The other, let's say, math, 606 mitzvot, those are just for Jews. But these 7, everybody should be able to cotton to. And people who keep those 7 laws are considered Noahide or B'nai Noah, or like these are children of Noah, as all are we all, according to the tradition. So I hesitate to say, like, if you, practicing all the commandments, the only thing it takes to be a Noahide is to practice these 7 Noahide commandments. I'm not going to list them all right now because we're going to do a whole video on that on Thursday. So I want to, save some for later. But I also have my own opinions about the label Noahide and the sort of Noahide movement and the Noahide, the pressure to be a Noahide. I think it's sometimes unfairly and without, and maybe even not always, but sometimes outside of the bounds of goodwill, to push people away from Judaism. And so I'll talk more about that later on in the week. Yes, if you are practicing Jewish practices, as long as those 7 are in your practice, then you can call yourself a Noahide. But we'll talk more about that on Thursday. So let's see. Reading the chat. Do I recommend a certain Sidor? Wow, that really, that's one of those that depends questions. I'll say it this way. The Sidor that I recommend, and I know this is going to come with some asterisks, I'll say it this way. If you have access to a prayer community, right? And not everybody does, especially people I talk to don't live close to a synagogue or something like that. If you have access to a prayer community that you can pray with other people, the best Sidor for you is the Sidor that they use, right? And get in with that prayer community. They usually have a whole table of them at the front of the room, and grab one of those and learn with that one. Whatever you can learn side by side with other people who are maybe a little bit ahead of you, that's the best one to go with. When I was in the process of conversion, when I was learning more about Jewish prayer, my rabbi recommended to me the Art Scroll Sidor, specifically the Ashkenazi one, because my community was mostly Ashkenazi. The reason he recommended the Art Scroll Sidor is because it is the most complete, in the sense of not every prayer service says all of these prayers, and that includes Orthodox services as well. They don't cover everything that's in that Art Scroll Sidor in every single service, but it's the most complete. It also has a lot of transliterations, and it also has choreography. Right? It tells you when to bow, which is terribly helpful sometimes. I'll say, if you don't have that kind of choreography in your Sidor, watch everybody else. Like, bow when people bow, sit when people sit, stand when people stand, and you'll get the hang of it eventually. So I'll say the Art Scroll Sidor is nice because it is complete. I will caveat that by saying it is the translations and, I'll say it this way, the translations presume an Orthodox practice and theology. And so if you are fine with that, jump into the Art Scroll Sidor. If you're part of a Reform or a Conservative or a Reconstructionist or Renewal or whatever, the Art Scroll Sidor can be valuable because it has everything in there. You can learn a lot, but just know that its translations and other writings in there are from a particular Jewish point of view, not universal Jewish practice. Let's see. What is? So I saw a good question in here that just got knocked. Boy, this chat is something. I'm going to need moderators here before too long. Just going back up, back up, back up. We've been going about an hour now. I'm gonna do this for about 5 more minutes, just because I want to make sure to get to some other teachings that I'm doing today. But we'll go for we'll do another 5-10 minutes in this. But this is a good question right here. Tsuyoshi Yoshida says, "Hello, dear Rabbi. Do you block non-Jewish people in the U.S. from participating in your prayers at the synagogue?" So, yes and no. I'll say it in this way. Um, you know, anybody who wants to come in and participate in the synagogue is welcome, provided they are not coming in and let's say preaching another religion. And I am just coming at you from lived experience here. Everybody is welcome to come in and participate in the Jewish service, provided they're either there to learn or to practice the Jewish service. I have had people come into my synagogues before who were not interested in participating in the Jewish service, but in shouting out, let's say, proclamations of another religion during parts of our service, and that person then would be escorted out, asked to leave, etc. But anybody can come in. This reminds me of a question asked earlier that I didn't answer. The army brat person says, should you call ahead if the synagogue has guards? You absolutely should. And this isn't necessarily to keep non-Jewish people out versus Jewish people. Jewish people going to these communities sometimes have to as well. And this is an observation that in many places around the world, especially outside of the United States, where there is heightened security concerns, and I'll say even within the United States, we have heightened security concerns these days, some synagogues post guards. And if you are not clearly a part of that community, then they may ask you questions or they may not let you in. A Jewish friend of mine went to a synagogue, I think in London, I want to say, and they called ahead during the week before Shabbat and said, "I'd like to attend services." And they said, "Well, I'm glad you asked, because if you just walked in, we might not have let you in. And this is just purely for security concerns in the world today." And they asked him for like a copy, like he had to like scan a copy of his passport to prove his identity and all these things. And so again, this varies by community. If you're going to a new community for the first time, it's nice to call ahead regardless, just to say, "Hey, I'm new in town. I'm going to be there." Sometimes that might address security concerns, but also just might mean that somebody knows you're coming and they can go that extra mile to welcome you, right? Whether you're Jewish, not Jewish, whatever, it might be interesting for the rabbi to know there's going to be a new face in the crowd, and then they can welcome you and introduce you to other people in the community. So it's a nice thing to do. So it's a safe thing to do and a nice thing to do. If you're in a place like Los Angeles where there's dozens of synagogues, you can walk in places and it's not going to be that big a deal. However, and that varies by different synagogue security postures. However, if you're going to some place that's totally unfamiliar to you, it's a nice thing to do to call ahead during the week, just to make sure if there are any security barriers that you have to overcome, that those things get squared away and that you can celebrate Shabbat with everybody as you wish. Let's see. Going to try to catch this question before the chat steals it away. Jen asks, "I have signed up to attend my very first Passover Seder. I was wondering if it's expected for me to bring anything or wear something specific." So I would suggest that you ask your hosts. I don't know if you're going to a synagogue's community Seder or if you're going to a particular person's house. Sometimes, when I have a bunch of people coming over for Seder, just to knock down some of the workload, I'll say, "Well, you bring wine, you bring a salad." I know that people are keeping kosher for Passover, for example, I'll farm it out a little bit. But in many circumstances, if you're invited to a Passover Seder, you can trust that everything there is going to be provided, and you're safer. And I'll tell you why in a second. You're safer not bringing something than, especially if you're going to your first Seder and you're less familiar with the kashrut, the dietary restrictions around Passover. You're safer not bringing something than bringing something. And I say this because many, many years ago, I was invited to a Seder. And this was before I really knew the ins and outs of what kosher for Passover means. And this was a very dear friend of mine whom I consider a Jewish mentor. And I thought I'm going to bring something nice. And I brought a box of Godiva chocolates. Right? And because this was like the nicest thing that I could think of to bring to their house, right? I knew they were going to get squared away on wine and everything. I was going to bring something nice for dessert. But the Godiva chocolates were not hechshered for Passover, and according to this person's practice, he literally could not have them in the house. And so, again, the nicest, most mild-mannered, humble teacher I've had among them says in the nicest possible, is like clear, pained expression on his face, communicated to me somehow that I needed to take these chocolates and leave them in the garage or take them back with me or something. That I was welcome. He couldn't have them in the house. And I could tell that it was like breaking his heart to convey that to me. And so I'll say, if you're going to a Passover Seder for the first time, bring yourself, bring your curiosity, and dress like you're going over to somebody's house for a dinner party. Right. And God willing, you know them well enough that you dress about how they dress. For guys, collared shirt and slacks is always safe. I'm in California, so it's a little bit more casual around here. But go like you're going to somebody's house for a dinner party, and you'll be fine. So I'm going to take just a couple of more questions here. We've got so much I can't cover. This is why I love these Ask Me Anythings, because, boy, you sure do. So let's see. I'm gonna cherry pick here a little bit, and I'll say if I don't answer your question, or if you're watching this later on the replay and I didn't answer your question, feel free to put those in the comments to this video. I'll take a little pause for PSA. If you have enjoyed this conversation, do me a solid and hit the thumbs up button in your YouTube watching device, just so I know that we're on the right track. Helps other people find this as well. Let's see. Here's a good question I want to tackle, and then I think we'll probably call it a day. I know in Judaism the mother's side is what matters more. What if on your father's side you're Ashkenazic but mom's side is Sephardic? Are you Sephardic? This is an interesting, complicated question because of how Jewish identity has been seen throughout many millennia, and so. What I would sort of I would approach, like, I don't have a pat answer for this because I don't get asked this question a lot, but I'm just going to work through this sort of logically. In Judaism, Jewishness, in terms of Jewish identity, for about the last 2,000 years, say, has been considered by Jewish law to be matrilineal. You are Jewish if your mother was Jewish, or you convert to Judaism by the standards of the community that you belong to, right? That's the two ways of being Jewish. Your mother's Jewish, or you convert. And again, that's a little bit different in the Reform world today, but that's not what we're talking about. So the Jewishness goes by the mother. However, even to this day, tribal identity goes by the father. That is, if your father is a Levi, or can trace their either by a family tree or just by word of mouth from generation to generation. If your father is part of the Levite tribe, you are a part of the Levite tribe. If your father is part of the Kohanim, which is a subset of the Levite tribe, the sort of priestly line, then you are a Kohen. And so one could then simplify and say, if your father is Ashkenazi, your mother is Sephardic, then you are Ashkenazi. However, that is a bit of a pat answer that might have a complication in its own right. And for me, that it really goes into what's the community that you feel most comfortable in that you're going to show up for, right? So if you feel more comfortable davening or have access to a Sephardic synagogue, you have Sephardic yichus. You have the pedigree there. So if you're going to show up Sephardic, then be Sephardic. But if you're more comfortable showing up Ashkenazi, show up Ashkenazi, and that's your minchag. As a convert myself, I had to kind of pick, in the sense, neither of my parents were anything. But the community that I joined, the synagogue that I went to upon conversion, was, followed the Ashkenazi minchag, and so that's what I did, and that's what I do. Today, in the United States, it's much more complicated. Specifically, the synagogue that I was a rabbi at for a few years, It was, probably about a 60-40 split, I'll say. Now, I'll say most Jews in the United States of America, I think about 80% come from Ashkenazi families, with about 20% Sephardi. It's a little bit different in Los Angeles, where we have a lot of Persian Jews and we have a lot of Israeli Jews who generally follow Sephardic minhag. And so it's hard to say, are we an Ashkenazi shul or are we a Sephardi shul? Sometimes we pick one Haftarah reading, sometimes we pick another Haftarah reading. For me, the guiding practice is, okay, you've got both in your family tree. Where are you going to show up? Because some people make a joke like, oh, the synagogue that I don't go to is Orthodox. Like, I'm an Orthodox Jew because the synagogue I don't go to is Orthodox. Well, what does that mean? So if you are comfortable showing up and contributing to a community that identifies as Sephardic, then that's what you should do. So that's kind of my stipulated answer, if you will. And this, I'm going to close with this final question because this is an important one. A friend asks, can a non-Jew possibly attend Pesach? What if they are uncircumcised? Does it matter? It does not. The reason this question comes up is because it says specifically in the Torah, when it's instituting Pesach, it's talking about the Pesach as the Pesach offering, this lamb that was slaughtered at the first Passover, where they painted the doorposts and stuff like that. And they said, hereafter you're going to sacrifice a lamb on Pesach for your household. And it says, no one who is not of your people, no one who is uncircumcised can partake in this paschal offering. And so some people assume that Passover today is the same thing and project that non-Jews shouldn't attend Passover Seders, and that is 100% unqualified false. So we don't do sacrifices anymore because we don't have a temple to sacrifice in. And so in this circumstance where there's like an animal being killed on the spot and roasted and eaten all the same night, then maybe, right? Then you go by the laws that are in the Torah. As rabbinic Jews who have evolved 2,000 plus years of tradition without the means of sacrifice, a Passover Seder, while it has some parts that are symbolically connected to that first Passover, that's why we have the shank bone on the Seder plate, for example, a Passover Seder is not the Passover offering itself. And so some would actually consider it a mitzvah to include non-Jewish people in a Passover Seder. And it's, as far as any law that I can understand or have studied or just pure halakhic logic, anybody can attend a Passover Seder. And it doesn't matter the condition of your circumcision. It doesn't matter whether you're Jewish or not. Many people who later convert to Judaism, their first encounter with Jewish people is a Passover Seder. And for reasons that defy logic, I mean, this is like a 6-hour dinner with a lot of Aramaic, right? But for reasons surpassing understanding, this experience is inspiring to people. And it was inspiring to me, right? This idea that this holiest night, one of the holiest nights of the year, Yom Kippur is like kind of top of the pole, but one of these holiest occasions, this, let's say, most frequently observed Jewish ritual in the world today, can be done at somebody's home instead of at a temple or a synagogue or something like that, that the table becomes like an altar, that everybody is welcomed in, and this is people's introduction to Judaism, is telling this inspiring master story around, let's say, a good deal of food. All the more so, I think, non-Jews should be welcomed at a Passover Seder. I hope that answers your question. We're going to be talking quite a bit about Passover in the coming weeks. This week, again, today we were talking about Ask Me Anything, just to give you guys a little heads up. Tomorrow we are going to be talking, getting into the finer points of the Friday night service, and bring whatever questions you have at 9 a.m. tomorrow about the Friday night service. Wednesday, we're going to be talking about the Saturday morning service. We did kind of an overview of prayer, but I really want to dig into these services as people's initial interface to Jewish prayer. Thursday, we're going to talk about this Noahide business. And Friday, we're going to hit the Parashat HaShavua, Parashat Shmini, this week's Torah portion. So listen, everybody. Once again, I shouldn't be surprised anymore. We've had a great crowd here asking some really great questions. I'll say I'm not surprised. I am impressed, and it's been my great honor to learn about Judaism, learn about Jewish people and Jewish traditions with you. And I'm going to sign off for now. If you didn't get your question answered, please throw it into the comments below, and I'll get on it as soon as I can. Let's do a little bit of podcast outro talk while I am recording. Goes a little something like this. Heroes, thank you all for chiming into this live Q&A session. Hero, if you are listening on the podcast, ex post facto, thank you so much for Thank you so much for listening to this conversation with the Jew Curious live studio audience. If you would like to participate in one of our live studio sessions, visit rabbijohncarrier.com. That's John with an H, carrier with 3 R's.com. And that is Rabbi, R-A-B-B-I, John, J-O-H-N, Carrier, C-A-R-R-I-E-R.com. And let me back that up. If you would like to participate in one of these live studio sessions, visit me on YouTube. Just go to YouTube and search for Rabbi John Carrier. And if you find my YouTube page and subscribe, you will see all the upcoming live sessions that we have. And I would be delighted to include you in this conversation that you've been listening to today. So let's see. What else do I want to mention before the end of the podcast? If you would like to continue this conversation outside of this context, I would love it if you would consider joining the Jew Curious Community Center. And which is a private troll-free zone on Facebook that you can access by going to jewcurious.show/JCC, as in Jew Curious Community Center. And if I can ask one more favor, I would be overjoyed if you would consider leaving us a review on iTunes. Go to iTunes, look for the Jew Curious Show, and leave us the appropriate number of stars, and maybe even a few words of compliment or criticism as your heart moves you. And if you do that, as we say in Texas, I'd be much obliged. Until next time, heroes, peace. Until next time, hero, peace. All right, everybody, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. That was a blast, and really great questions. Got some stuff about Passover in there, got some stuff about Shabbat in there, prayer book stuff. So once again, everybody who's new here, thank you for hanging out. Everybody who is not new here and has been really welcoming and supportive of everybody who's here for the first time, I am ever grateful for that. And I'll say at this point, I am no longer surprised. I am still terribly impressed. So thank you to Teresa and Kathy and Val. Thank you for participating, Victoria and Jen, and a bowl of salad. Thank you for great questions from a bowl of salad. Grysicle, great for being there. Army Brat, nice to see you. Nice to meet you this time. So Bud Rod is back from Georgia, I believe. And so I should just, if I'm speechless, I should just shut the heck up. So thank you, everybody, for participating today. And until next time, peace. I'm just so proud to know you.